Some tips on how to make your kettlebell clean, not suck. There was someone on Reddit asked me for some thoughts about this, so it's actually going to want to be in several videos. The first thing that I like to introduce people to conceptually is learning how to clean. A lot of folks do it too soon, in my opinion, and too soon is not a unit of time. Too soon is a level of experience. And what I mean by that is we learn swings, and then the next logical thing seems to be clean and press, right? But the issue is, with a swing, you know that it's going to end up right out in front of you. With a clean, it's supposed to end in the rack position. In fact, we used to say in the old days that a clean is a swing that finishes in the rack rather than out front. And we would say that a snatch is a swing that finishes overhead. The reason it's a problem is we are explosively lifting something, which by definition means there has to be some acceleration and some speed. You can't grind a clean. It becomes some bastard curl type thing. So there's this explosive movement, and the weight, the kettlebell in this case, needs to be weightless or close to weightless momentarily at the apex of that swing so that we can manipulate it into the position that it needs to be. It has to be ballistic. The problem shows up is when we don't know in our nervous system, in our movement patterns, in our body, where it needs to be. Where is the rack position? We can only clean as good as our rack position is. So if you come from a barbell background and you think a rack position looks like this, it's not going to work very well with kettlebell stuff. If your elbow is way out here and you're got all of this distance between the elbow and the body, it's not going to work very well. The rack needs to be in close with the inside of the elbow against the ribs. And if you want to take to the kettlebell sport extreme, hip resting or elbow resting on the hip and hands coming across the center line. That is what kettlebell sport athletes do. They have a particular way of gripping it that plays into that, and I think it's all fantastic. That's not where I tend to start people though, because some of that is sport specific, and it winds up being something that the average fitness enthusiast who wants to get stronger or lose weight or whatever doesn't really need. So the question then is, how do we safely figure out this rack position? And the way that I have done it for years is inside the getup. When we do a Turkish getup, we get the kettlebell vertically, I'm lying on my back, I roll up, and I wind up in this seated position where this hip is on the floor, this hand is on the floor, this hip and this foot are on the floor. From here, I've always been a fan of adding in presses. It's self-limiting. You can't do it too heavy because you can't manipulate the getup that way. So when I add in presses, we're in this position here. We bring the kettlebell down into the rack with the idea of taking the inside of the elbow, contacting the ribs with it, and letting the ball of the kettlebell rest in this little divot that is created by the upper arm, shoulder, and the fist. Understanding that position is vital to being able to do it clean. Otherwise, you're explosively going somewhere and just hoping you end up in the right spot. I use the getup specifically because it's a movement that I've already taught people. They have a base of knowledge to draw on that is already familiar to them. Familiar equals less threatening. If they're pretty familiar and feeling pretty good about being in a seated position with a weight overhead, bringing it down here is actually easier than holding it overhead. So they feel very safe. They've got a hand down, they're sitting down, the floor's really close, there's not a lot of distance to drop it if it falls, and so they're able to find that rack position, plus they're going to be leaning a little bit to one side, not a great deal, but a little bit to one side because of the nature of the support of the hand. And that's going to cause the kettlebell to settle into its position even smoother. So that's where I start, is with understanding the rack position. Because if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter how explosively you go there. Figure out the rack position, get your nervous system and your body to understand that rack position. And then we can add in the rest of the clean and do it safely and do it effectively.